Welcome to another video. This is the Fry's StraboKran kit by Amusing Hobby. Pause here if you want to know more details about the StraboKran, of course. So this kit is part of my repair yard diorama. It is a fairly simple kit, had just a couple minor fit issues. The worst thing about this video isn't the kit, it's going to be the video quality. This was not the first thing I recorded, but the first thing I recorded that actually was in the right format and didn't get corrupted. And I thought that it would be just plug in the camera and hit record and you're going to be good to go. So I got an autofocus camera, plugged it in, and here we are. And yeah, needless to say, it's not the best quality of anything. I'm since using a different camera from a different angle, and we'll get to those videos eventually. But before we can get to the new stuff, we've got to get through this old stuff. So here's the Fry's StraboKran, built by Amusing Hobby. Right here, we're just going through a quick unboxing. I'm not going to give you the details here, just kind of showing the parts and trees. It's a pretty nice kit, pretty straightforward. Now we're getting into the actual build. We start the build with the gantry portion. So we're going to be building up the gantry cart and then into the overhead frame, and we get the entire top part built, and then we move on to the lower portions. So here we're starting to build the pulleys. This here's the drum that the internal cables ran off of. So the only electric motor on this device would be attached to this drum, and this would lift the actual steel cable that raised and lowered the lifting hook. I was very impressed with the molding of this kit. The gantry itself was pretty impressive, and the teeth on this gear is pretty good. Here you see me using my extra thin Tamiya to smooth out some ejection pins that were too recessed to bother sanding, but just a little bit too visible for my liking. That said, once it was all put together, I don't think it would have made a difference at all, because it gets tucked away back in this functional gantry. Functional meaning the carriage for the gantry does go back and forth, and you can build this kit, as I mentioned in the notes section, in either a standing format as if it's in use, which is what I'm doing here, or in a folded format as if it's being transported. The only other fit issues I really had, there's a couple things on the gantry. One of them is coming up here very shortly. It's getting one of the cross gears in here in place. It wasn't long enough, so I had to we'll just say rig it up. If it was functional, it would not hold at all, but since it's just a static display piece, it did fine. The other fit issue that I had is for the chain that would move the gantry cart. It did not fit through the pulleys. They weren't wide enough, so I had to drill them out with my Dremel and then file them a little bit wider. You'll see that work coming up, and it looks great. You can't see anything at all with where I had to do those works in the finished kit, but it certainly was a problem, and they should have built the pulleys a little bit wider to fit in there. So here we're building up the gantry carriage. Not quite as many wheels and pulleys as in a Tiger or Panther tank, but still a considerable number and much smaller, so even a little bit harder to work with. This is the problem with my camera angle like this that I realized, and why I don't continue to do it this way is one hand, my left hand, half the time is blocking what I'm actually working on. You can see there that the gantry does roll and function, which is nice. These are actually the wheels that are used for it to move on the rails that will get put up in the gantry. The previous ones that we were doing were the pulleys that were used by the cable to lift and lower the lifting hook. This is where the carriage goes in, and now we're adding the rails that the carriage will actually be running on. So it's very important to get these guys nice and flush and square in there. Otherwise you could have issues with your carriage sliding around. And if you don't put the carriage in there before you glue these in place, you're not going to get your carriage in there without taking something apart. Like I said, it's very important to keep this square, so you see me using a lot of these cheap little clamps here. As you can see here, it does still slide around. And this is where I'm using my Dremel to widen out those pulley channels. And now the diamond file. The chain they gave with it is a pretty impressive to scale chain. I was pleased with it. Kind of finicky to get fed down through here and wrapped around where it needs to be. But once you get it going, it's not so bad. Tweezers definitely help out with that, of course. Then once you get it started, you want to super glue your first end in place. You're going to end up super gluing all of it in place, actually, but you definitely want to get it started so that you don't lose your work and effort. Quick set is always handy. Anytime you see that green applicator, that's what I'm doing, is putting some quick set on the super glue. Using the tweezers here to feed the chain through. Cutting that length. If I remember correctly, it's 4 lengths as you're going through this, 1 on each pulley section. You can see, even with the chain on it, it will still go back and forth. Here, putting on the final details of the carriage. This is where the towers and the gantry actually end up attaching together. Assembling the fine details on the end here. And here I'm feeding the chain through that would be used to move the carriage side to side. The other side has the chain that would be used to lift, or lifting mechanism. Little dab of super glue. Little dab of quick set. On to the next step. And here's a good view of the gantry. Well, an okay view of the gantry. You can see the detail of the chain that they give you there. I was also very pleased with the detail in that motor right there, and then also in the electrical box. And you can see the electrical conduit even in there. So now we're moving on from the gantry build, that is all complete, and we're moving into the undercarriage and wheels section. Each wheel is comprised of 3 pieces for the tire, 2 outer pieces and a center piece, which actually comes together and makes a pretty good looking tread for your tire. Then you have the wheel rim and some bits and pieces for the hub. So here we're cutting out all the wheels and tires for one side. It's got a dually on each axle, each side of each axle, so you got 8 wheels total. Here you can see me assembling these wheels. And again, lots and lots of clamps, very handy. Once the tires have had a bit of time to set up and dry, you glue in the wheel rims. And here's a nearly complete axle setup, putting on the last of the hubs. You can see tie rods and everything. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple, but nice design. These wheels will actually pivot with the frame. I suppose you could glue them in place and make them stationary, but you don't need to. They were pretty sturdy. And clamps to hold that in place. Apparently I was very clamp happy on this model. Small little pieces and parts for assembling the jack stands or stabilization plates, whatever you want to call these. That white wax grease looking pencil there is actually a picking pencil that they use in the jewelry industry. It's very handy for picking up small parts. I've seen lots of newly designed things coming out that do this same thing with silicone tips. I might have to give one a try, but these pencils here, you just, as one end wears down, you unwrap it and keeps replacing an end. The nice thing about these is they were pretty cheap. And you can see right there, just tap it down, pick it up. Does the same thing. They do wear out, but it was like 3 of these for $5, so you can't beat that in price. That's the lower carriage, so now we're building the towers. The towers were a fairly complex system to build up. You had to definitely pay attention to the instructions because there were a lot of cross braces and pieces that would not go together the way they looked like they should go just by looking at them. And even more pulleys. And again, each pulley was molded as 2 parts. And again, lots of clamps. All those pulleys actually get attached into one side or the other of the tower. Each tower had a manual hoist inside of it, and they would scissor it up or down to go between transport and function mode. You could see here how the model kind of opens up and does that, but it's definitely not functional on the model. You build it one way or the other. There's both the towers complete, and now we're attaching the towers to the frames and axles. Lots of actual clevis pins on this kit, which I thought were pretty cool. Rather than just gluing pieces together, you actually put it together and then slip the clevis pin in place. Those are mostly complete. Now we're putting in the shafts that would work the lifting mechanisms. can't remember what I had to do with this rod here. I think that either the pins were too wide to fit and I didn't want to sand them all down, or I was missing some pins or something. It wasn't a big enough deal that it stuck in my brain, but you can see I definitely would attach a drive shaft and then slip that rod in there, glue it in place, snip it off, and I did that time and time again. So there must have been missing pins or pins that I replaced. Now we're cutting some of this thread that they give us to the appropriate length. And this goes in and acts as the steel cable that was used to lift and lower the towers. Again, super gluing it in place and using some activation. Here we're back and building the actual lifting mechanism for the gantry. That spool of wire is actually hanging from the hook, and I'm assembling the lifting cables that were used. You can see the 4 of them right there. Now they're put on the ring, and there I just test fit the ring. Here's the actual turret that we're going to be lifting up here. This is the turret from the Rye-filled Models full interior kit that I've got the video up there for. And here you can see it actually hanging. Pretty nice and stable. And this brings this video to an end. Subscribe and like if you're interested in seeing more. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.